Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashley Klein-Jimenez. You're joining us for our Prevent Connect web conference today, Holistic Approaches to Youth Wellbeing, Supporting Mental Health as a Strategy for Sexual and Intimate Partner Violence Prevention. Prevent Connect is a national project of Valor US, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or Valor US. All right, so enough from me. I am really excited to be hosting this web conference with our friends and colleagues at Prevention Institute. They will be facilitating this web conference today, so I want to introduce you to Will Crary, Lisa Fujia Parks, and Zachary Taro. Will, I'm going to hand it over to you, I think, and thank you all so much for being here with us.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. And also echoing what Ashley just said, that we're very excited, and in a few minutes here, I'm going to say enough from me and pass it over to the people we really are excited to hear from today, which is a group of guest speakers that we've brought together to talk about this topic of holistic well-being for young people. I'm just excited to share some of the insights and expertise that here our Prevention Institute team has, but more than anything, the conversation is really going to spotlight the wisdom of our guest speakers. So we're really eager to get to that portion and grateful for everyone to join. And so we're going to start off with our objectives here, which helps us sort of set the trajectory for what our conversation will be. And I'm going to read them because we spend a lot of time trying to get this right so that you all know what you're signing up for, and we can have this shared discussion. So we are going to describe the connection between youth mental well-being and preventing sexual and dating violence, especially within the context of distressed school and social environments exacerbated by COVID-19. We want to identify strategies that authentically engage young people, that integrate violence prevention into a holistic approach for mental well-being. And then lastly, we're going to spend time discussing, and that might happen in the chat, that's going to happen with a panel with our guest speakers, discussing best practices and opportunities to partner with young leaders in a way that honors their vision of how their environment can foster mental health and safety from violence. And so the way our web conference is going to look today is that we're going to frame the topic a little bit here with a couple reports that we found helpful. And then we're going to hear from two separate sets of guest speakers thinking about the connection between youth mental well-being and violence prevention. And then we'll bring all of our guest speakers together for a panel with audience participation sprinkled in between. And lastly, I just want to share our intentions are really to center community-based and school-based perspectives. And this conversation is to emphasize sort of this direction setting. We heard that so many of you are coming from SV and DV coalitions and crisis centers and public health departments. And so understanding how to work together to support this work moving forward. And we're going to actually start with the grounding exercise, and I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Lisa, who can help us understand why we're starting this way.
Thanks, Will, and hello, Prevent Connect community. It's always great to be with you and to start the year together in this very thoughtful way. My name is Lisa Fujia Parks, and I'm with Prevention Institute. When we were coming together to talk about this web conference with our guests and friends at Valor US, we were really reflecting on how much we are very aware of the sort of very intense challenges that individuals and families and communities are facing right now, and what was the right way to create a container that would feel authentic and supportive to people who are coming here for support. I have lots of people who work with young people in schools and community environments in my life, and their distress is very, very real, and it's a really challenging moment. So we started off by saying, well, how can we integrate the notion of keeping your cup full into this web conference? And then we said, well, maybe that's not really going to be right for a lot of people. Maybe it's not about keeping your cup full. Maybe it's about making sure that your cup isn't empty. And then someone even said, maybe right now it's just about making sure that your cup doesn't fall off the table and crack. And I think all of those are very real. So we acknowledge and honor where you are, where the folks in your lives are in terms of the nature of this moment. And as part of that, wanted to start with a grounding exercise, and also to integrate into this conversation ways that we can do this work in a way that cares for ourselves and the others, everyone in the community. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Will.
All right, and actually, I think I'll kick it over to Marcia.
Hey everyone. Yeah, thank you so much. Ashley actually started us off a little bit by asking us what was one thing we loved about working or supporting young people. And so I like this as a grounding exercise just to bring us back in and bring us to our why. Right now, educators and frontline staff, people working with young people in schools and community-based organizations, like many of you, are just experiencing a pretty chaotic moment that we're in. And so I think it's really helpful to have a grounding exercise. It gives us permission to slow down because there's this sense of hurry to get to the next thing. And one thing that we've been working just within my own team and with any meetings that we start is to just take a moment. And we moved away from calling them icebreakers. We call them connecting moments, because we know that transformative change happens within relationship. And when we can remember why we do this, when we think about one thing we love about working with students or clients or children and families that we serve, personally, I really like that. I love working with students because it gives me a lot of hope for the future. They have so much resilience, and we're in such a dark time right now. It really allows me to pause and think of the big picture and think of the future in a more positive way, sometimes when days don't feel so positive. So that's one thing that's been working really great for my team. And again, really giving ourselves permission to not just jump right in it. Think about why you're here today. So I just wanted to share that with you all. And I did notice in the chat people who came on earlier who maybe didn't hear the prompt, but people are inspired, people feel connected, working with children, people feel, have to move up here to the top, but there's a lot of really great comments in the chat that talked about why you're inspired and love working with kiddos. And so I'm trying to pull it up here, but there's many people in the chat now, so I'll leave you with that. But I've seen some positive things in here, and it's really exciting that we're here today with you all.
All right, thank you so much for that, Marcia. And I failed to mention that Marcia is one of our guest speakers today, so really grateful for you jumping in before your moment to shine is actually occurring. So we're seeing so many good things come in here, fresh perspectives and optimism. Honored to be able to be safe space with young people. So much good stuff. Intergenerational support, source of inspiration, new ideas, imagination. All right, really loving what we're seeing. And on the next slide, we actually have a text chat question to get us thinking specifically about this topic. And so we want to stay grounded in what Lisa and Marcia shared with us about the why, as Marcia stated. And so what we have here, we just encourage you all to think about these questions, answer these questions throughout the remainder of our time together. And paying close attention to this word, what are you noticing? We want to just say that noticing can certainly be positive, not just the challenges, worries, issues. But as Lisa stated, we don't want to just talk about filling our cups up. We don't just want to focus on this is how we're going to make everything better, because we understand that in this moment, things are feeling really challenging. So we have these two questions. And I think we can move into framing. And if folks want to answer those questions, move at your own pace. So before we get to our guest speakers, I just wanted to take a moment here to introduce two reports that the Prevention Institute team found really useful in thinking about this topic today. And we're genuinely excited to share these with everyone, but we're also curious if you have come across any resources that you think the virtual learning community would find helpful. So feel free to share throughout if any ideas are sparked, and we have some links to each of these reports that we will share in the slides as well as in the chat. And so we're using these two reports with quotes that you can see underneath just to give you a quick idea of what they're about. One from the US Surgeon General's office and another from the nationally recognized nonprofit Alliance for Girls. And we'll say a little bit about more about who they are. And we chose these two reports because together they help contextualize mental health challenges experienced by young people, but really focusing on critical themes like health equity, community level strategies, which is what we got to hear Ashley frame earlier for us, thinking about primary prevention. And then two last themes I wanted to mention were intergenerational partnerships. So young people honoring their wisdom to identify solutions, and then justice orientation. How are we moving towards always ever increasing justice and acknowledgement of the harms that have been done? And my last note here is that, actually on the last slide, sorry, for Alliance for Girls, girls refers to, and this is how the organization describes it, gender expansive youth. So cis girls, trans girls, non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender queer, girl identified youth. And today's speakers don't focus exclusively on girls, although we felt this was still a strong framework to share, knowing that violent incidents impact feminine and gender expansive bodies at disproportionate rates, and also that a lot of what we're going to talk through really resonates for all young people, we think. And so on the next slide, I want to just briefly share a little bit about the US Surgeon General's advisory called Protecting Youth Mental Health. And essentially what we want to highlight here is that the current challenges young people are facing are enumerated in a really supportive way that contextualizes their mental health challenges individually, at a family level, at a community level, environmental, and society. And there are solutions identified for each level, as well as many key players that can support the mental health of young people, which, as it turns out, everyone has a role, regardless of what sector you're in. And so it's a really powerful piece. Two features that we're really excited about in this report are its emphasis on vulnerable populations, such as LGBTQ+ youth, youth of color, and youth in rural communities. And also its acknowledgement that we must take a systems level approach in partnership with young people. So working with creating the conditions for young people to imagine what communities can be like, what support they need, what programs they're looking for, how they would want to see money spent to improve their own lives. And we're excited to hear today's speakers talk about these ideas as well, with some of the cited concerns impacting young people in this report being things like during the pandemic, not having as many opportunities to be in relationship with supportive adults, or fewer opportunities for healthy in-person socialization, higher rates of trauma and grief, many things, up to really the existential with climate crisis, politically motivated misinformation campaigns, gun violence, police murders. So it's a really expansive report, and we're excited that you all can check it out a little bit later. And not that everything needs a silver lining, but this report does offer a silver lining, which is just helping us reimagine how to improve young people's lives using lessons that we have learned from the pandemic. So we'll get to hear our guest speakers talk a little bit about that as well. And some of what came up in the report were really simple things that a lot of us probably intuitively understand. Like, we have learned in the pandemic that more sleep is a really important part of healthy mental well-being, more time with family for healthy family environments, identifying ways to diminish bullying and academic stress. So we'll be excited to dive into some of those a little bit more with you all. And then our second report is, I'm going to read a quick quote from the report, and there's so much beautiful imagery in the report. I'm excited for you all to get to see some of it now and maybe check it out as well later. But they say that girls are telling us what they need, what works, and what they want to feel safe. In transforming our institutions and systems post-pandemic, we should look to those voices for guidance on how to best invest in and rebuild our ecosystems. And so we love the dedication to youth leadership here. They surveyed over 1,000 young people during the pandemic. And despite a lot of alarming and maybe not even surprising findings, Alliance for Girls believes that we're at an inflection point. And so they want to use this moment, use the lessons that we're learning. This is maybe a refrain many of you are familiar with at this point, but to not go back to normal. The new normal has taught us so much about what was normal before. And so like the Surgeon General's report, they really pay close attention to socioeconomic, socio-environmental factors and how challenges are compounding and becoming exacerbated, especially for young people that are already experiencing intersecting inequities based on location, class, race, and so many other identities. And lastly, before we jump into our guest speakers, I just wanted to share some calls to action that came from this report. And I won't enumerate them in this moment because I can't do justice to them in the way that the report itself does, but suffice to say, there is ideas for how to move forward. There are ways that each of us has a role in creating the school environments, the community environments, to support the mental well-being of young people. And so with that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Lisa, who is going to kick us off with our first guest speakers. And so here's the entire group that you can see here, and we're going to jump into our first set.
Wonderful. Thank you, Will. And thanks everybody for the very robust chat. Lots of useful insights about what's going on in your community and lots of people communicating about what they're interested in. So really encourage you to connect with each other via the chat if you know of a resource that might respond to what someone else is raising. So it's a wonderful aspect of having this community and being able to be together. So I am so honored and excited to bring Fardosa Osman and Mohammed Mousse from United Women of East Africa Support Team to share with us about some of their work. So it just makes me so happy and to feel very hopeful and yeah, just very, I guess the word happy just keeps coming to mind. Just to know these two human beings exist and are being, oh yes, right back at you, Martos. I mean, yes, so much heartfelt appreciation for you, that you exist, how you exist in the world, the love and care. I mean, I want to say work, but it's really love and care that you bring to your communities, and for the opportunity to partner with you through various projects, and for your generosity and sharing with the community today. So I just want to tell our participants today just a little bit about both of you. So Fardosa Osman has spent most of her life serving the San Diego Somali community. She values her intersectionality as a Black Muslim woman from a refugee and immigrant community. She works hard to create equitable, resourceful, and accessible spaces in her surrounding communities to empower herself and those around her. And as a youth coordinator at UW East, Fardosa develops and implements the programs that serve the needs of East African youth. And Mohammed Mousse is a program coordinator at UW East. Mohammed has a bachelor's degree in psychology and is in the process of earning a master's degree at San Diego State University. And UW East's mission is to be the force for culturally competent health services, education, and advocacy for the well-being of the East African community. UW East meets the overwhelming physical and mental health related needs of East African refugee women and family, primarily in the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego. So amazing, beautiful, beautiful community and beautiful work that you do. So Fardosa and Mohammed, please feel free to tag team with each other as we go through these questions. So I want to start off with asking you just to talk a little bit about what you've been seeing in your community in terms of the last couple of years and the effect of the pandemic and the multiple interrelated issues. What have you seen in terms of the impact on the young people that you work with?
Thank you so much, Lisa, and everyone else for having us here. And thank you everyone for joining us. For your question, the pandemic has been a dark time for a lot of people. And like Will said, there is a silver lining because we got to learn so much about our community and our impact in our community and how important it is to stay connected despite the fact that we can't be together in person, especially for the first year of the pandemic. But what we learned was that for our students, a lot of them struggled in school because some of them didn't have the resources that they needed. And but then other students were happy in the pandemic and their grades showed it. Like they went from being like B students to A students, or even like struggling in school to doing great because they had the support at home that they needed and felt more confident in school. But we realized that for our students that don't have that support, that we need to create a space for them where their parents feel comfortable for them to come to, especially during the pandemic. So yeah, that's what we noticed in terms of like students and school. We also noticed that uh, a lot of the students reported discomfort in terms of like substance use that's happening in the community and violence. We did some research and we saw that that the pandemic has affected multiple communities in the same way that like sexual violence has went up, online harassment has went up, and a lot of other things. And parents don't have access to what their kids are seeing online. And a lot of things are happening under the rug, you know? So we just wanted to create a space for students to come and feel comfortable to share what's going on in their life, and share what they're seeing and their experiences. Yeah, so that's what we see.
And and just to add on top, first and foremost, thank you guys for having us. And like for those who was mentioning, it was already like a disadvantage for our community, you know. And for the pandemic to hit, it was like a cherry on the top. So it was just I've seen a lot of people suffer. Um, there was no school, so these kids were like less motivated. We used to have a place. Well, we have a place called the Hub where they come in, they do homework, they hang out, and it's like a teen center, you know. And they couldn't be able to do that because we had to be 6 feet apart. We had to be isolated, stuff like that. So it sucked. And then also for me too as well, I can imagine what they went through because I was not motivated when I was in school. So I was like, I'm a grown man. Imagine these kids, you know, not for them to feel the same way. So it sucked, and it was bad. It was like depression, anxiety, because when you're like when you're just at home and you're just thinking, you're gonna have anxiety, you know. But when you're up and you're just doing stuff and you're with your friends and you're doing activities, you're not gonna have time to be thinking about stuff. You're gonna get off from school, go hang out with your friends, do your homework, and it just sucked for these kids. And yeah, our community suffered a lot.
Mm. I'm very, very sorry to hear that. Much of what you shared resonates as things that I saw, you know, within my own communities and in other communities too. Can you speak a little bit more about the kind of connection between what was happening in the home life and these other dynamics you were seeing, and the impact on young people's mental well-being and safety?
Yeah, I've had a few students contact me and talk about how like they don't like being at home. Some students have been like, how can I move out? Or like, and it's not, a lot of times it's not like, it's usually like their sibling, they're having a fight with their sibling, or um, like it's too loud at home. A lot of our community members, we come from big families. So it's like, I grew up with like 10 siblings. Like it's very unusual to see a small family. So especially for the girls where they have a lot of home responsibilities, and helping take care of their like siblings and things like that. It's really hard to focus on school, internships and anything like that at home. So they need a space outside of that, outside of home, to focus on their future.
Yeah, also like some kids will like hit us up and be like, "Oh, Kobe, can I use your laptop?" Because they didn't have that resource, at home. They're relying on school. They could go to school and they could go to the library. So for them to hit us up, it's just it's crazy. They would try to use our laptops, and it was just like they weren't trying to be home. It was like any excuse to leave home because it was like it gets depressing. You're just at home. You don't know when the pandemic's gonna hit. You see the same faces, you can't hang out with your friends, and then it gets to a point where you're like, man, like, are we ever going to go back to normal? So a lot of the kids that reached out to us, like, I felt like, they didn't want to be at home. They wanted to like, hey, can we at least do hiking? Can we at least do other activities? So but yeah, because our community needs us. We're like the voice for them, and we're the resources. And then once you cut off that resource, it's like, okay, now I'm back to square one. So yeah.
Mm.
And then there's also like, language barriers and other issues that they deal with, in terms of school. Like some 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 students are straight from, their home countries, and English is not their first language. And when school is all online and they have to read so much and it's hard to like, comprehend everything, it makes school like extra overwhelming, more than it would have been if it was in person and they can have that one-on-one interaction with people.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that context. And now I want to kind of bring us into how you all have been responding to the different types of ways you've been supporting young people and their families. But I want to first acknowledge that you all are from the get-go deeply, deeply by and for the community. Like you are of the community, from the community, for the community. You are leaders, who are part of this, um, you know, I mean, care for the larger community, which is just so beautiful. Um, but so you were doing that before the pandemic, and you've deepened and evolved in some ways. But can you just talk about some of your perspective on why community-based, culturally rooted supports for young people are, by and for community members is so essential for their safety and well-being?
Mhm. Um, for me, it's like, me and Kobe have been in this community since day one. We were like born here. Well, I'm not sure if Kobe was born here, but he was definitely here since a young age. And we know everyone. And what's great about our community center is that they hire, youth or people who are very close to the youth age, so that we could look at people as a whole. If somebody is having a hard time, then I know, oh, um, their aunt might have passed away, or like, you know like I know what their home situation is, sometimes without even them letting us know. We hear it from the community, and I think that's really important in terms of a holistic approach, because let's say our goal is to destigmatize mental health, right? um, I think it's important to like look at other issues that people might be going through in order to help them deal with their mental health issues, like homelessness, or um, like dealing with school stress or like not being able to find internships and jobs and things like that. So that's the approach that we like to take, to like look at them as a whole and try to help them in every way that we can.
Mm. And I also understand that you attend to the needs of the adults and the broader community as well as part of supporting young people. Can you mention just a little bit about that?
Well, U East has like multiple programs. They've had programs where they help adults with signing up for like resources like EBT, Medi-Cal, things like that. Because our community needs help in terms of like finding resources from the ground up, because a lot of them are refugees. Majority of them, if not all of them, are refugees. So we help the adults find like job resources, help them with like understanding uh, like the school system for their students, for their kids, and things like that. And we also educate them as well on like mental health issues. We have programs like Baking Connection where moms come together, bake and talk about like mental health and other issues that they go through. We've conducted healing circles for moms as well, so that like moms um, that may have kids that go through substance abuse and other mental health issues, and they come as a support system to each other. Um, and so many other things. Honestly, we help people find like rent help and things like that. So uh, we really are for the community, like you mentioned. And I think the only way you can have strong community bonds is to like show people that you're there for them, in anything that they're going through, so that they feel comfortable to come to you and I
Mm,
feel like the space is safe for them.
beautiful. That's such a great point. I just want to highlight, yeah, in order to have strong
I
community.
just want to add on.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, let me just add on. Yeah, like Verdosa was saying, yeah, for those, I wasn't born here. I was born in Kenya. I came from a refugee camp and I came to America when I was like 3. So I kind of learned everything here. But yeah, just seeing like the trust that they have for us, like they see us, they're like, okay, a Somali black person, you know what I mean? We could go up to them because a lot of people, they don't, they have that, how do you call it? They're just like traumatized, like they just don't trust everybody, you know. And when they see the people in their community that they see every day, they're like, okay, I can talk to Kobe, I can talk to Verdosa, I feel more comfortable, you know, instead of going to a therapist, instead of going to a doctor or whatever, you know. And obviously, you know, we're not the best people for them as of like knowledge wise, but you know, we're getting there. But it takes time. But at least we're there and we could tell them, we could guide them throughout the process and let them know, hey, we're here for you. You know what I mean? A lot of these parents, they can't speak English, you know. We're all first generations here. So it's like we translating for them. We're doing all kinds of stuff. We're going out of our ways to help these people because we really care about them. And for them to for us to come here, you know, we have a purpose, you know, we have a better opportunity here. So why not take advantage of it? You know, why not help others out? So it's like that trust that we have with the community, and it's going good. And we're just trying to move that on generations after generations so we can have that strong bond. And I feel like, you know, it's more of a family to us. So a lot of us know each other since we were kids. It's nothing new, you know. We know each other by their first names, last names. So when we see each other, it's more of like a family instead of like friends or whatever like that. But yeah, thank you for Dosa for touching on that.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, the kind of connections and service, right, and that you offer is invaluable, irreplaceable. Um, the love and care, right, just keeps coming to mind as the words. And I remember another community leader who was kind of pushing back against sometimes kind of the desire to emphasize quote unquote evidence-based programs that a scientist has developed in one particular community and kind of replicate that in a mechanistic way. Um, she said, love is the evidence-based program. the number one. So that's really coming through. So we just have a couple minutes left, but I want to ask you first to talk about, give some examples of the ways that you support young people in a holistic way. And there's some beautiful photos that we're looking at on the slide. So maybe just touch on a few examples of what these types of activities are and how they support young people's well-being and safety.
Okay, so we try to like do things that interest them. So a lot of times we survey them to see what they love to do, and then we look for opportunities out there in the world for them, you know, and help them find what their passion is and things like that. In terms of like trying to address mental stigma, substance misuse, and violence in the community, we do workshops, especially during the pandemic. It was so hard to like get people together on Zoom. But we wanted to stay connected with our community. So we did workshops to educate them on mental health and just to start conversations so that when we eventually, we're still on shutdown again, but but eventually when we're not in shutdown, we can pick up where we left off. We did healing circles, and since we do this culturally based, we have like a girls healing circle and we have a men's healing circle, and Kobe will talk more about that. But what we do is we let them know that this is not a replacement for therapy, and that we're not therapists, but it's a space for them to feel comfortable to share on their experiences. We like to keep it positive and not trigger anybody and re-traumatize anyone. So we always talk about triggers and try to keep it like not use words like sexual violence, sexual assault, or go too much into detail about their specific experiences. If they want to do that one-on-one, obviously we always give them space for that. But just to not trigger somebody else, we try to keep it more general than to go into too many specifics. But this is just a way for us to open up resources to them, and tell them, oh, if you need help, here's a list of, you know, therapists that have experience working with Muslim Black people or are Black or Muslim, so that they have somewhere to go to get one-on-one help. And yeah, we've covered like light topics like, well, it's not light, it's still important, but like self-love, boundaries, and then topics like suicide, loss, uh, domestic violence have come up and things like that. And we just, you know, have a healing circle. Yeah. And then for the high schoolers who don't come to the healing circles, we also do a high school program where we open up internship opportunities for them or program opportunities for them, and also like a paid internships so that they have job experience, and also like virtual college workshops, college prep, and help them with just everyday school life. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to, we have like a basketball program for them where it's like no cost. They just come in on a Sunday, and it's from like 2 to like 6, and it's from ages 7 all the way up to like, so 7 all the way up to 12. That's like one group, and then the other group is like high schoolers, middle schoolers, and high schoolers. They run games, they play. They love coming. They're always asking us like, "Hey, are we gonna come this week?" Because there's some weeks that like obviously that we don't have control of, that the gym they canceled or whatever. But then they're so excited to come, and then they play basketball. They hang out with their friends, and it's something for them to do instead of like hanging out. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on and that they could be doing outside. So our goal is to try to keep them inside and be positive. Also, we do have healing circles. We change it up a little bit so it don't seem like like a therapy session. We go to the beach. We have like a bonfire, and we haven't went these couple last weeks because it's been super cold and COVID. But when we were going, it was great. They would come out. We would have s'mores. We would have cookies, and we'll just be a brotherhood. We'll talk about life, and and then we'll have like everybody has the opportunity to share. We don't force anybody to share. It's just coming out there, having a good time, talking about life, talking about what they did, what their goals are, and just having that like, okay, we're here for you. We're your family. And a lot of people sometimes, they're isolated, and we're trying to get them to come to us. And I think we started off with like maybe like 15 people one time, and then it grew all the way to like 40, 50. It became bigger because we're like, you know what, tell your friends, like come out and have fun. So that's some stuff that we do too. And for Dosa mentioned the high school program where we're like dedicated for them to apply for college, and then just giving them the resources, like how to talk in an interview, what to say and what don't to say, like what you shouldn't say, stuff like that, because they're not so used to it. It's like for them, like they grew up like trying to like get it on their own. So we're like trying to let them know that, hey, like we're your mentor, like we got you. We've been through this process. Let us make it easy for you. So yeah, that's some of the stuff that we do. And then for the basketball league, we got about like, with the little kids, we got about like 100 kids that come out. So it's nice.
Yeah. And it's not just basketball, it's like team building. It's like spending time together. Kobe always does, and it's really cool. I'm going to record him one day. He always does like a motivational talk with them. And it's amazing how much they love it and always come back. Our goal is really just to let them know that they have a right to follow their passion and that they're not imposters in this country. So yeah, that's basically what we try to do.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to just make a couple wrap-up comments, and we're going to move to our next guest, and we will look through the chat and pull out questions and comments that people have shared. So then you come back for the panel part of the workshop or this session, we can integrate some of what people have put into the chat into that portion as well. But, I could talk with you all for all day and multiple days. I want to just share with participants that the UW East work is so multifaceted, partners at the county and city level, working with adults, families, and young people to address mental health, education, career, spiritual life, safety, violence prevention, so many issues. And as you can see in such a holistic and integrated way, some of the work that I know about that you didn't mention, are things like working with faith leaders to address issues around domestic violence, or hosting healthy relationship workshops. But the obviously the way that you do it right is not being driven by these public health kinds of terms like changing social norms or those kinds of things, but really in this really authentic way that, like you said, builds strong bonds, builds trust, builds a sense of family over the course of people's lives. So thank you so much for sharing about this beautiful work that you do, and just so much appreciation for you, and want to support you all in any way we possibly can to continue your fantastic work. So with that, I will pass the facilitation back to Will, and we will continue with our session today.
So thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Fardoza and Mohammed. There are a few questions in the chat for you both, so I encourage you to go in there. The conversation is alive in there, and I'm going to move us to our next guest speakers, sort of transitioning from a community-based perspective to a school-based perspective. So we would like to welcome Marcia Perez from the Multnomah Education Service District and Denise Wright from the Centennial School District in East Multnomah County. And briefly their bio. So as the mental and behavioral health system strategist, Marcia helps to create regional systems across 8 school districts as they implement mental and behavioral health priorities in their student investment account plans. Having worked in a local juvenile department, she brings a decade of experience with justice involved individuals and serving as a sexual assault and domestic violence victim advocate. And for Denise, aside from being a student service director, she is a friend, mother, wife, sister, daughter, aunt, colleague, and educator. And I'm sure there's more on that list. And Denise has worked in education for over 26 years as an educational assistant, special education teacher, district consultant, and administrator. Denise is energized and inspired to work with others who are willing to examine and take action against systemic racism and oppression. And so while we go through this conversation, we just welcome all participants to put questions and comments in the chat anytime. Really excited for Marcia and Denise to be joining, and we're going to just jump right in with our first question here, which is, what ways have both of you seen the pandemic impact young people's mental well-being and safety in Multnomah County? And also, what are some of the nuanced connections between mental health and experiences of violence that you're noticing in this time?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. And as we come into this space, and even with that question, I think when we met with Will earlier to talk through this, my answer probably was one thing. And just thinking about the spike in COVID cases just the week and a half, how students are reacting is so different. So something that we're seeing in each of our schools right now, and we're a school district of about 5,700 students, and we're considered kind of an urban suburban school district with global majority students in our district. And so we're seeing students across the spectrum, which would make sense because I think adults are having reactions across the spectrum. So we have so many students who are actually really glad to be in school, and they're showing up and they have smiles on their faces. 2 days ago, I was in a building doing the hand sanitizer squirting as kids came through, and it was just like smile after smile after smile after smile. And that was fantastic to see. And then we also at the same time have had students literally leaving our buildings in the last couple of days, which will bring me, just gets emotional that they're like, I can't handle the stress anymore. There's so many people getting sick. There's so many positive cases. My teacher's out. I have a new sub. And so the impact is just so intense for students. And so again, it's just this huge continuum. And so adults are trying to show up for students regardless of where they're coming in right now. So those are some big pieces. And something else that we're seeing is for some students, there's a quickness to react physically or a quickness to react verbally versus being able to kind of interact and be calm and think through things that are happening. And again, seeing that with adults too. So I think just the stress level, trauma responses, we're seeing that from students and adults a lot right now. And I bet Marcia can add some more pieces onto that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. I really felt the emotion in that. Unlike Denise, I don't actually work in a school building, so I just always have a heavy heart when I hear these things because we offer at the MESD, Multnomah Education Service District, mostly technical assistance to districts across the county. And so just to get to the nuances, Denise was talking about how students might be reacting sometimes physically. We're hearing the same things. We're supporting teachers, coaches, skills trainers, folks that work with students, and there is a pretty large spectrum of things that are happening. Some people are just really quiet, and some people are exerting whatever they're feeling in that moment. And so we're hearing that there's just a lot of the biggest thing I hear most often is that there's a lack of resources and access. And so like Denise said, because of the increase of COVID numbers in our community, we also have a major staffing shortage, whether that be teachers or mental health clinicians. And It was previously mentioned, just like not everybody needs therapy, but what we do know is people need strong relationships with adults in buildings. And that's been really challenging lately. At least in Portland, Multnomah County, we're also experiencing our deadliest, most violent year in 2021 that we've ever had. So gun violence and specifically domestic violence and child abuse were the highest it's ever been. We had, I can't quote the number, but we had a pretty significant number of homicides due to gun violence just in this last year. And so that creates a pretty significant toxic stress and vicarious trauma for both students and staff trying to help support them. Again, everyone's feeling really anxious. Folks are losing their coping skills or maybe haven't even developed them depending on what grade they're in. And so it's been pretty challenging in that way.
Thank you both for sharing, and Marcia, for the context of what is happening in the county with increases in rates of violence. And also, I think in the conversation Denise, Marcia, and I had before this web conference, we talked a little bit about that idea you just mentioned, Marcia, about young people maybe having not had the opportunity to understand social norms and age-appropriate development. And so coming back into school, how I think, well, actually, I'll pause there. Denise, did you want to share more about that? You shared it so well last time.
Oh, goodness. Now I'm going to have to remember back.
Just do you.
I don't know if it's going to come to me right now. Let me think about it for a second.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think she was talking about just like that gap in school. And this stood out to me, Denise. You were talking about like if you were in 4th grade and then it was time to be in, suddenly you were in 6th grade, there's this huge developmental gap. Like not only academically, but also just social emotional learning and coping skills. I think maybe that's what you're referring to.
Perfect. Thanks. I'm glad that both of you are remembering that because that is a conversation. Just had it with some staff this morning. And so those are things that our buildings are seeing both academically and socially of how to support students when we know a year and a half, they missed some of that academic instruction, as well as then our middle school is a place where we're seeing it a lot because our middle school is used to working with students who are 7th and 8th graders. And they're working with students now who haven't been in school buildings potentially for their whole 5th grade year and their whole 6th grade year. So students are showing up with behaviors that maybe our elementaries are used to. And that is causing our secondary instructors to have to rethink, like, what does it mean to support students and to teach them how to be partners and community members within this space, kind of having to do it quickly, but also go slowly to really build and support them through that.
Excellent. And so I think in the context of the individual challenges young people are facing, the community conditions, Marcia, that you're talking a little bit about, Denise, you're talking about fractured school and social environments, teachers might be out, friends may be absent, those sort of things. I want to move our conversation upstream a little bit and just hear a little bit about what upstream strategies are being implemented in the schools, Marcia, that you work with, Denise, the district that you are at, and tell us a little bit about what we're seeing on this slide here.
Yeah, thank you. So under the Student Success Act, which is a bill, a House bill that passed a couple of years ago, it's our largest investment in our state, which really was focusing on the mental and behavioral health needs of the most underserved students of our state. With those funds, the MESD put together a really exciting and comprehensive plan to basically try to think upstream. They're our largest investment, and it's what I would like to consider a universal strategy, which we're calling Safe and Connected Schools. So this icon here, or it's not an icon, but it is a visual, and we're really it's called Safe and Connected Schools, and it's really an integrated plan that supports the vision where equitable, trauma-informed practices not only resist in creating more harm or re-traumatization of students, but also prioritize healing as integral to learning. So we're saying firmly is that in order for schools to be a place of learning, they must also be a place of healing. And we center equity and trauma and a trauma-informed lens with all of our work. And so the other pieces here are our guiding principles. But this is our largest investment, like I said, and what we've done is hired a group of coaches who we're in the process of hiring. We just hired 2 coaches that are doing consultation with schools and trying to reimagine what in their district or in their school buildings, in their policies and practices, can they change in order to build relationships and cultures that are centered in policy change and procedure. And so they're working as thought partners, and the 2 staff we have now are actually licensed clinical workers. So they have a clinical background, and the others will have a K-12 background, really to support districts to reimagining what they can do as a universal strategy and more upstream. As you probably hear most often, we tend to stay in the crisis response and intervention lane. And so safe and connected schools is one of our more universal strategies.
And for us as a school district, we benefit greatly from the work that Marcia and her team are doing, because as a school district, we have many of these same focuses. Our visual looks a little bit different, but with the same components. And part of it is this, there's a lot of tension right now because part of our upstream strategies are to really encourage our building staff and collectively as a district to remember the systems that we've had in place that we can build from that really support students. And so when I think about systems, it's really like our multi-tiered systems of support. When we think about what are we providing to all students, what are we providing to some students, and what are some of those individualized needs. And we've had a lot of systems built before this, and we're trying to strengthen it. And part of knowing that adults are really stressed right now, not wanting them to have to think through something new, like who do I go to if a student makes a suicidal threat or draws a picture, pointing a gun at someone. We want those to be, systems that our staff remember, like, oh yeah, we do have a process. We do have a place that we go to. And we're trying to focus as much on prevention as possible. And so much of that has to do with building relationships between students and staff, students and each other. And examples of that, 2 months ago was our first time across our district that we brought together all of the staff who facilitate and support our gay-straight alliances. And so, each of those individuals felt like they were on their own islands at their schools. And so to bring them together to recognize that, one, they're not alone, they were able to craft share, they could talk about, what's working and not working, and collectively they could share what students really want to do and what students want to change. And just having some moments like that's really powerful. And this also was within the context of staff being really stressed that they're not able to participate in the meetings that we would love to have with them after school to help problem solve and to figure more things out. So we're constantly trying to just dance and be there for folks, and knowing that being short-staffed does have an impact to more of our upstream strategies, because we have school counselors in classroom subbing instead of really providing those tier 2 small group instructions. So it is by means not perfect at all. And we're still trying to collaborate and work together. And again, really grateful for Marcia and her team, who have a little bit of that brain space because they're not having to sub in classrooms, that they can think through and pull resources together and help us as we're developing our systems at the building level.
So much good stuff and all of that. And what both of you just shared, especially about this multi-tiered systems of support, makes me think of, this is maybe a resource we can share, the idea of a curb cut effect and what we've seen out of the Othering and Belonging Institute and John A. Powell's work on targeted universalism. I think someone can probably describe that more succinctly than I can, but I think the curb cut idea is just that you come up with these solutions very intentionally trying to support people with highest needs. Maybe it's people using wheelchairs, maybe it's parents using strollers, and you begin to see that it's helpful for young people skateboarding in the community, it's helpful for bikers trying to avoid unsafe streets, all of these things. And so the multi-tiered systems, Denise, you're mentioning gay straight alliances across campuses supporting staff supporting young people come together and connect more. It made me think too about the work we just heard about from U East and Fardoza and Mohammed, and talking about just prioritizing connection, prioritizing trust building between young people, the supportive adults around them. And Marcia, you said it can't be trauma informed if it's not healing centered. And so healing in this time of deep isolation and disconnect. So really appreciating that. I wanted to hear a little bit about maybe just any advice you have for how adults at community-based organizations, and so back in specifically you both working in a school environment and with leaders and educators and young people in school environments, what advice do you have for adults at community-based organizations, SDV organizations, public health departments, parents, schools, to model equitable gender norms and healthy power sharing? And I think this is actually something I just saw come up in the chat as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our guiding principles with Safe and Connected Schools. It was we really wanted to figure out unique ways to collaborate more and enhance the voice of the community. And so one of the things I would say that comes up often is when we think about just an equity lens that you might be using, you're always asking yourself, who's missing here? I think for us, we really want to share the power with the community. And so ways that the health department and other departments in the county and schools have done is through parent groups, through youth advisory councils, and really setting yourself to have a good relationship with those groups. And the last thing would be making sure that you have the structures in place to actually take in their feedback, because all too often what we'll see is we ask community and then sometimes don't deliver because we can't get out of the structures that we're in. So really being prepared to look at your own structures internally and figuring out what can you adjust to make sure that that the voices can actually be elevated.
And I would say additionally, work that we're also trying to do, and for myself as a white woman, like really sitting with my whiteness and unpacking that and seeing where and how that's showing up. And we have, we partnered with Andrew Tisha Fitzgerald, who wrote Anti-Racism and Universal Design for Learning. And we did a 4-part series with all of our staff, instructional staff, so over 400 people through September, October, and November. And part of it, one of her strong themes is around power and honor. And so and majority of our staff are white. And so, you know, having to really recognize where and how that can impact our families and students of color, so that we're open and available and willing to learn a different way of doing school. And so it's really tricky to invite folks in without doing some of our own work to be ready for sharing that. And so I think as schools, we have tons and tons to learn still of how to really, really share power and to really honor families. And so something we do end up leaning really heavily on many of our community partners. We have a lot of culturally specific partners, and that's a great benefit to students. And we have to keep continuing to remind, you know, myself and our staff that it doesn't get me off the hook. Like I still need to do the work and I still have to show up, even though we have partners that are here to help support us as well.
Can I add, Will, just one more thing as
Yeah.
Denise was talking about that, or, you know, at least with the ESD, and I've only been here for about a year. When I first came, I think when we offer technical supports, often what we do is get folks from the outside, having previously worked in violence prevention and knowing how many individuals are in our community who actually know the work. So Denise talked about relying on our community-based organizations. One of the things we've tried to do is figure out like who's here now that can talk to schools about community violence, for instance. We wouldn't want to pull somebody from the LA area to talk about what's happening in Portland, although that is what we always do. And so how do we change that and share, you know, power and knowledge that exists here in our own community? We've tried to do that more.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think what you're both sharing is going to come up in our panel discussion right after this too, where we get to hear about the importance of culturally specific approaches and relying on the assets that already exist in our organizations, our schools, our communities. And so quickly, as we wrap up this portion here, on the same topic, I'm wondering, with this theme of cross-sector collaboration, what advice might you have for community-based advocates who want to partner with the school district? Or if you want to take the question the other way, what requests do you have for community-based organizations, SDV-focused organizations who are wanting to partner with school districts?
Do you want to take that, Denise?
Sure. So a couple pieces with that. One is for me trying to be really cognizant of the asks that I put on partners, because part of it is trying to figure out how can it be an equal partnership. Because I feel sometimes as schools, we feel kind of desperate and like we need some people who have expertise. Please come help us. Please come do this, without recognizing the toll that it could take on our partners. And so I think part of it is the ask would be being able to really partner in that upfront conversation of what is it that you need from us as a school district to really support your work? Where do we find that commonality? What is it that I can do to support and make your work more successful with students? And I think that's really, really helpful. And I think examples, Marcia and I don't know that either of us spoke to it, but both of us sit on a countywide group that has partners from so many different sectors, our county, different school districts, our developmental disabilities. There's just like, it goes on and on and on, health. And part of it is just building the relationships with each other so that when either community specific needs are coming or student specific needs are coming up, we have those partnerships and we know who to go to. So back to Marcia's, knowing like who are the folks doing the work, who's connected, who's the most informed, and partnerships. And so it'll be nice when COVID's over and we can actually meet in person again. But having those virtual connections is really, really important to getting resources to students and families as quickly as possible.
Marcia, anything to add there?
What I'll add, I mean, that was perfect. And I was just looking at some of my notes. And so the group of the multi-sector group that Denise mentioned is actually the group that conceptualize safe and connected schools. So a lot of incredible work comes out of that group because of the different stakeholders that sit at that table and their connections to community. And so I would just echo what Denise said.
Wonderful. Well, not the last, we will hear from Denise and Marcia because we're about to jump into our panel. But before we do that, just deeply, deeply grateful for both of you for making time to join us today, talking about requests that come from folks working in an education setting. Marcia and Denise, and I'm sure Fardoza and Kobe are all very busy people. And so we're so grateful that you could do this during the school day. Middle of the week, so grateful. Zach, is there anything coming up in the chat that you want to share? I know there's a lot going on in there before we move to our panel.
Sure, yeah, I think I'm just seeing a lot of shared empathy for folks who are working in a school setting right now and working with young people. And then I'm also seeing an appreciation, especially for the language in the Safe and Connected Schools graphics, and that approach and the way that it's all laid out, I think is resonating with folks. But I'll go ahead and pass it over to Lisa to keep us going with our conversation.
Great. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, Will and Zach. And the chat, a lot of question and answer happening. So I'm glad that there's richness happening on multiple levels, multiple ways. So we want to bring back our 4 speakers today to ask some additional questions to all of you. The first one I want to start off with is kind of bringing back to this recognition of the connection between mental health and well-being and sexual and domestic violence prevention or safety from those issues in people's lives. And it seems to me that one of what's, one aspect of what's happening is there's greater recognition of the need to pay attention to mental health and well-being, behavioral health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities. So I consider that a really good thing, and a potential for a transformative moment in perhaps fundamentally what we prioritize and how we organize our communities and our school environments. So given that, there is this sort of attention and acknowledgement happening around mental health and behavioral health, kind of building on the questions around advice to our participants today, what advice do you have for our participants who maybe they're a sexual and domestic violence focused organization or a public health entity or a CBO who maybe mental health and well-being is not their focus, or maybe they don't work in schools, but how do we bring the resources and gifts that these different organizations and groups have to kind of meet this moment of attention to mental health and behavioral health? Do you have any advice or suggestions there for, how we can all be part of the solutions that in doing so can address multiple issues, including sexual and domestic violence? So whoever has a response to that or wants to go first, please go ahead and jump in.
Hi, I want to take this opportunity real quick to address something that I wanted to add in this webinar about the healing circles and the pandemic. The healing circles was something that had to be in person. It couldn't be on Zoom because we don't know who's listening in and who's in the background, and if the people who are attending feel safe to share. Just wanted to add that. In terms of your question, when we were building these programs, we looked at it as like, let's say you're trying to make a new friend, off the bat, or like you want to be friends with somebody, off the bat, you don't talk about something deep that affects you deeply. It takes time. You need to build trust. And so I think when looking at like working with the community, you have to go back to that foundation of how to build a relationship and help them and support them, not just in what you want to help them and support them in. Like, we wanted to just address the issue of substance abuse, but we went beyond that because people are a whole being. They're not just, one thing. So helping them with, internship opportunities, finding internship opportunities, job opportunities, building confidence, something as small as that can help, strengthen your relationship with the community and help, address the issue eventually that you want to help address.
Thank you.
I can jump in. So Lisa, I think last time we chatted, I was preparing for a large convening related to violence prevention, where really our goal was to bring multiple stakeholders together to create a shared understanding and of just what they're doing related to multiple forms of violence and allow that connection between different sectors. While also, like, at least in the Portland area, like I talked about, where domestic violence is pretty high. I'm going to speak to like the group that's here right now. We know that that domestic violence is an all-time high, and so when we think about bridging those connections, just making sure that we're offering different resources and hosting opportunities to remove silos and sharing what the investments are. When we had that meeting the other day, it was really positive, and people were like, wow, I had no idea these things were happening. And when we think of domestic violence exposure in childhood specifically, we know that it fuels many forms of violence. So it's all interconnected, whether it's gun violence, gang violence, sexual violence. And so making sure that we don't stay siloed and like, this is the only type of violence that I work in, so I don't do this. And so we know that when we work together, we get, our impact is much greater. And so all of this work matters.
Thank you.
And I was wondering about taking Jesse's question that's in the chat. We might jump off there, but Jesse, one of the pieces for our countywide group is it's been in place for about 15 plus years. And over that time, it's really grown and it's more expansive. And so seeing that you have a group in one county and not the others, something might be figuring out which structures you have in place. For Oregon, we have educational service districts, which are big umbrellas that support all of our districts. Some states have those, some don't. But figuring out maybe who some of the go-tos are on your one county group, and then figure out who would be that parallel person in the other county, and then start with conversations, because our group started with a little tiny group of educators, and then each time as new issues came up, it kind of grew. Who else could help have the same conversation? And the group that we sit on are people that can have financial decision making in our organizations. We can also help craft policies and procedures. And so that's the level that we often will craft things, share them with superintendents, or superintendents might filter stuff to us and then we filter it back to them. So it's kind of at that level too. So hopefully finding some more connections in the other county will be helpful as you're trying to build that.
Thank you so much. So I also want to respond to the question that Erin put around the connection between supporting mental health as a strategy to prevent domestic violence. And that was a little bit of where I was going with my question, but I'm going to actually ask our participants to help crowdsource answers to that question. I'll offer a couple of my thoughts, and then would love to hear where other folks, what folks can add. But I think part of what I'm hearing from all of our speakers is that it's really important to meet folks where they're at and where there's openness for, and where folks are asking for attention to be put. And so that builds trust and safety and creates a foundation for then layering on a more complex relationship where more issues can get addressed. I'm also hearing that, maybe we can frame relational health or sexual health as components of mental and behavioral health. And again, sort of, take what we do and sort of help make those connections, that relational health is an aspect of mental health, or maybe talk about shared risk and protective factors or things like that. So that's a little bit of what's coming to mind for me. I'll put those in the chat. And again, really would love to hear from participants about what their thoughts are as well. Handing it back to you, Will.
And just because I don't think we got to hear from Mohammed on that last one, open to everyone. And Mohammed, I know that you were talking about the basketball program, hiking program, going out to the beach for bonfires with young people. And so I'm really curious to hear more about authentic intergenerational partnerships and alliances, whether that's shared decision-making, identifying what programs or choices are made that's really spurred by young people. And so I'm curious, how does your work uplift youth leadership, and how is that connected to well-being and safety?
It connects with like safety, as in like we're not out there like doing what we're not supposed to be doing, you know what I mean? And then like as of like we're outside too, when we do the hiking, is more of like for their bodies, you know what I mean? They're out, they're active, they're exercising. And then at the same time, like it's beneficial, we're doing two things at once, we're learning about stuff and then we're exercising, we're getting our, some people are like burning calories, some people are running, some people are just walking. And it's more of like, instead of sometimes it gets boring when you're like in one place and you're just like, talking, or you're just like doing the same thing all over again. It's just more of like we're outside, fresh air. So it's more like more healthy, I guess, if that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing we just have 5 minutes left here and a few closing slides, but any other thoughts from Denise Cardozo Marcia on that question, or any other questions you've been seeing come up in the chat? If not, I can also maybe invite some final thoughts from our guest speakers today. And I think I can give two questions that I'd love a response from each of you on, one or the other or both. But wondering about just the enormous tasks ahead of us and keeping young people and their families safe from COVID and violence and mental health challenges. Just any parting practical wisdom you might want to share. And some of that might even be some of going back to our grounding exercise. So personally for yourself, what have you found helpful, or what advice might you give just to our practitioners and advocates joining us today? So we can maybe start with Marcia, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to go back to the why. I think it's so important to keep us grounded and rooted in our work because of so many unknowns right now. It's just so important to remind ourselves why we show up every day for our communities and for the people that we serve.
For me, I think my final thoughts would be to us community as family. So it's just an extended family, and every approach that we go into for any programming or anything at all, we follow that mindset. Communities, family. For example, somebody asked a question about how we deal with conflict between the students. And my answer is I'm just like a big sister to them. Same way I would solve a conflict between my younger siblings, it's the same way I would solve a conflict between two students. Talking to them one-on-one, making sure they feel like they're not being attacked and that they're validated, but also taking accountability is that's what we do basically, treating people like family. I want them to win. I want them to stay hopeful, and be able to reach for their dreams. And I hope they feel that from me and from Kobe and everybody else we work with. And yeah, I always wanted a role model that felt that way about me. So that's what I try to bring to the table for them.
Yeah, and just to add on too, for me, like my final thoughts were just like I have a goal, and I want them to, like, whatever I couldn't do when I was young, I want them to be able to do, I want them to be like, hey, we had an opportunity, you know what I mean? A lot of people don't have opportunities, and then for them to have people like us, and I even tell them too, like networking, like know people, like, you feel me? Like getting in there and like know people, see what they're about, make friends, make connections, because they can later on help you out. And I just want to line my people up, for success. And also too, because I'm gonna have kids, in the future, and I want them to be good, and I want them to have a place where they're like, okay, like I have this opportunity. My father didn't have this opportunity, but I did, and I want these kids to have that. I want them to feel like, okay, at least we have Kobe. For those or people in the community that's gonna help us out, we can go to them, for stuff like us. I know when we grew up, like it was hard, we had to get it on our own, there was resources that we didn't know, we had to find out, and we just had to, like, we had to go through like the hard way. And I want them to, like, for once, with all the disadvantages going on in the world, for at least for them to say, okay, I had an equal opportunity. But that's it. Thank you.
My parting thoughts would be find your people, both at work and at home. And so who are the folks within either your organization, partner organizations that can be your thought partners, that can cry with you, that can laugh with you? And then who are the folks at home, and so some of the people in my outside life share very similar professions. And so we can share that. Some of them don't. and just being able to have that that reality check of like, okay, I'm not the only one who's experiencing this. I'm not the only one who's trying to solve this problem. Because right now, you know, my brain is stuck sometimes when it comes to being creative and trying to problem solve. And so I keep trying to remind myself, all right, who has some open brain space? Who can help me think through this? Who has a different lens? Who has a different perspective? And again, who's going to hold me accountable and who's going to call me on it? And again, who can listen to me cry, who can laugh, who can share a joke with me. So I hope you all have someone that can be your person right now too.
Wow, couldn't have asked for better closing words from each of you. I don't want to belabor the rest of what we have because that was the highlight for me. The next few slides, we just have a few of the resources that were shared throughout our time together. These slides are available for everyone attending. We have links, we have names of these resources, and I think there were a ton of resources shared in the chat too. So very grateful for the participation and brainstorming, dreamstorming happening in the chat. Huge thank you to each of our guest speakers today. The wisdom that you all bring is the heartbeat of this work, and we're so grateful for you. And big thanks. And all of their contact information there. They have been generous enough to say, yes, reach out. I think we maybe accidentally did one wrong on there. We will clean that up. Sorry about that. And then on the next slide, just again, huge thank you to each of you from the Prevention Institute and Prevent Connect team. We're always here to hear your questions, think about what topics might be of interest for future presentations and web conferences. And I think that's all we got. So be safe, be well. Thank you again to everyone for joining.